On today's episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities,
That's where the repetition and why the practice is just so incredible. It literally changes you from the inside out. And then when you change from the macro changes.
It's stress debt. So can you differentiate that for us?
Yeah, calm wins every time. The calmest person in the room wins every time.
I was constantly in a state of go, go, go until my body said, nope, sorry. And then I get bitten by a tiny little tick and then my body can't fight that off. Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you today with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, alternative perspectives on mental health. I'm very excited for my conversation today with Nic Monteforte. She is a formal national executive, certified meditation teacher, and high performance coach with over 30 years of expertise in leadership and well-being. She is the creator of the stress debt economy and infinite capacity formula, two groundbreaking frameworks that help leaders reclaim up to 70% of lost potential and achieve sustainable peak performance. Today, she is recognized as a leading authority on stress transformation and performance, inspiring audiences and clients alike to break free from stress debt, unlock their infinite capacity, and create extraordinary lives. Welcome, Nic.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel very honored to be here. Thank you.
Yes, and we're so lucky to have you as well from Australia, all the way from down under.
Yep. Very different place and going into winter. So the opposite of you right now. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. No, we're gearing up for spring and loving it. So
Yes.
I always like to start off the show with introducing our guests and having them tell a little bit more about their story. How did you come to be doing this work that you're doing today?
Yeah, so I had I'm very driven. If you ask any of my family, very determined, very driven to succeed, and all of those things from a very young age. I was a competitive downhill skier from a young age, so had potential career in that area as well, and so got into areas of passion, which was health, wellness, but also leadership and business. And my career sort of went from 0 to 100 very quickly over a short space of time. And I ended up in a very, very big C-suite role, high performance, high performing teams, 250 million turnover. And I was, flying high, but in that real hustle culture, where you just push, 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 push. And at the time, it was all fine. And then I hit a bit of an obstacle at around 40, when I turned 40, and I call it my decade from hell. And everything that I had worked for, there were some things that happened that were out of my control, and the wheels fell off my life completely. And everything that I had built and everything that I had earned had fallen away within the space of 12 months. And I had two kids, single parenting at school, a mortgage, didn't know how I was going to put food on the table. And because I've got an education in human movement and understand the physiology in the brain, because I'm a bit of a neuroscience nerd, I was doing these different tactics to get me through, putting one foot in front of the other. And it wasn't until a friend of mine who was going through a tough time, I gave her one of the strategies that I developed myself, unknowing, without having the science behind it. She said, you need to be sharing this with people. People don't know this. And so there I went into a deep dive into the science behind what I had been doing. And then during that period of time, so I started to write a book and all of that sort of stuff. And then I started to think I was coming out of that decade from hell. And, lo and behold, nature wasn't quite finished with me for this period of time. And I got slammed again, and I really broke into a thousand pieces, and I was quite shattered. And I was suffering from, I had, during that 10 years, a lot of severe illnesses. I was in and out of hospital for 10 years. So I was quite sick, a lot of operations. And then that sort of last hit got me, and I was kind of broken, and, stress, anxiety, sleeplessness, high blood pressure, illnesses, the whole lot. And I was doing all the things, because I know how the brain and body work. So I was doing all the things, but it wasn't enough. And a friend of mine tapped me on the shoulder and said, I know you're doing all the things. I was meditating, I was doing everything. He said, but you need to go and learn this technique. And I'm like, oh no, I already know. I know what I'm doing. The whole, it's all right, I've done everything and whatever. But I was so broken. It was like, okay, I will do anything at this point in time. And so I went and learned the technique that is kind of the keystone of everything I do moving forward. And within a week, my life really started to change. Things started to change. And so, of course, being the sort of neuroscience nerd that I am, I needed to understand it from a physiological point of view. I needed to know what was going on. So I went into the science, and I ended up studying it for a period of sort of 3 to 4 years with the intention of, wow, it changed. My whole life changed. So things started changing from that moment. So the rebuild happened. My nervous system changed. I became a very different person. I could see the world from a different set of eyes, and the knowledge that I was learning along the way was really changing things for me. And I thought, if I can help people back then where I was before they get there, by helping them know this, giving them hindsight. I've got the foresight. So rather than people having hindsight, people like me who are super achievers and high achievers and have that push and have that real hustle culture, if I can teach them a new way of operating, then they don't have to go through the suffering that I went through, and things can change for them proactively rather than reactively. And that's how I got here, where I made a decision that people who want to work with me need to follow learn the techniques and learn the things that I do, so that when we do the work together, when we do the high performance coaching, the leadership coaching, middle management, sales training, whatever, when I'm working with those people who want, big things in their life, they have the foundation, the right foundation to launch from, not from a place of depletion. And that's kind of how it all came about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing about that. I can relate to a lot of what you're talking about. I myself, as some of my audience knows, became very ill in my mid-20s with what eventually took them 13 years to figure out, that what I was struggling with was Lyme disease and chronic fatigue syndrome. And the chronic fatigue syndrome part is, women in particular, tend to be over-diagnosed with this, not overdiagnosed, but tend to have it in higher proportions than men often do. And they've seen this connection between super high achievers, type A females, and this chronic fatigue syndrome, which I think is speaking to what you're talking about, is just this constant hustle. I was constantly in a state of go, 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 until my body said, nope, sorry. And then I get bitten by a tiny little tick, and then my body can't fight that off. Right.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, when I look back now, obviously hindsight's a great thing, but when I look back, I think to myself, okay, it's fine to be like that. Like, it's fine to be a high achiever. Where the issue is that we're not looking after our nervous system properly. We don't have the knowledge, and we don't have the understanding of what that is actually doing to the nervous system and the physiology. And therefore, you don't notice it back then. You're younger, you're more sort of agile, you've got more energy. It pays. Where you feel it is in, when you push past that sort of 40 mark and you get into that sort of next chapter of your life, that's where you start to see the flow on effects. And a lot of them you don't see because they're inside, and they start to display on the outside. So yeah, that's the problem with that. It's a lack of understanding of what that is actually doing to the physiology in those times. It's not that it's wrong. There are other ways to do it where we don't have that negative impact.
And so when you're working with folks in the workplace, so this is really, us exploring kind of mental health, a dysregulated nervous system. I'm wondering if trauma is going to be part of this as exploration as well. What do you tend to see with these folks that you're working with in the more, work environment? How is it that their mental health might be seeping in? What is happening? Do you see patterns? What have you observed with this topic?
Yeah, the one thing that's really noticeable at the moment is microaggression. So it's happening a lot in organizations. And I see it because I also have a corporate side. So I've got my feet in both sides of the camp, so I still have corporate work and work inside organizations in that capacity, as well as the coaching and mentoring. So you see a lot of microaggressions, people biting and being microaggressive to each other, that real reactivity in the workplace. That's the one thing you notice. So there's real reactivity, quick, sharp, fast reactivity. And you're hearing it from the top down too. Like, you're hearing it coming from some of the senior leaders going, they don't know what's going on. There's just all this aggression in the workplace. That's the first thing. The second part that you start to see is you start to see illness. So you start to see an increase in absenteeism. People can hide behind productivity. So, there's people talk about a decline in productivity. There is, but it can be hidden quite well. So you don't necessarily, how do you measure? That's a bit harder, but seeing people not there is another thing. And they're usually not there. They say, they take sick days or absentee, because they're exhausted. They have got nothing left. It's usually not because often, they get sick and they get the flu or all those sorts of things. But generally speaking, what you're seeing a lot of is people needing to just take a mental health day. Now, that was never a thing, and I know it's a thing, and that's fine, but I understand why it's a thing. Now, you understand people just they can't. It's not and it's sitting under the guise of burnout, but burnout is just a completely dysregulated nervous system because of the stress debt that they've built up in their body, that their nervous system doesn't have capacity to do one more thing. And that's why they need to take that mental health day. So that's kind of what you're seeing. So the things that I'm hearing from people are, that I am so, I can't lift my head. I'm so exhausted. I can't even face having to do anything. Like, one more task is going to push me over the edge. And then also the reactivity, they're talking about clashing with people at work all the time. There's a lot of microaggression. There's a lot of agitation. There's a lot of frustration. That's what I'm hearing a lot of at the moment. And not just at work, it's playing out into their personal life. They're talking about when they go home, and it's just carrying over. So that's kind of the majority of what I'm hearing right now.
Yeah, and coming at it from the therapist side, as a psychologist,
Yeah.
I see in my practice, here I am in San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley, Tech Central, and so that hustle culture is very much here. Everything you're describing, I hear my clients complaining about, and I want to come back to this term stress debt, because my clients will say, I'm so exhausted and depleted, but I'm getting 8-10 hours of sleep a night. It's not that I'm accruing sleep debt, which we sometimes hear that term, right? It's stress debt. So can you differentiate that for us?
Yeah, I can. So stress is not the problem. Staying stressed is the problem. Okay. So our bodies produce chemicals, stress chemicals, your adrenaline, your cortisol, and there's a lot of others I won't go into, but it produces those for a reason. It's there to keep us safe. It's there to push us into action. It's there to motivate us, all of those sorts of things. But what's happening is we're staying stressed. So stress is meant to be a cycle. A perceived threat, and I say perceived because a lot of them are perceived, threat comes in, the body releases the chemistry to help us, increase heart rate, dilate pupils, get us ready to take action. We're meant to take some action, which then gets the body moving, those chemicals through the physiology. Then you finish the action, the body gets a signal that it's safe, and it drops back into homeostasis, and it's a cycle. We're not finishing stress cycles, so we're just staying stressed. And I talk about stress debt. Another way to look at it is like pancake layers. Because we're not finishing the cycles, we're building up the debt. The debt is building, right? So it's like a pancake stack. Eventually, the pancake stack is going to topple over. So the difference with sleep, and this is the biggest thing that is out there at the moment, is people sleep and they wake up tired. Now, there's a reason for that. Because they're not completing stress cycles in the waking state, so they're not removing the chemistry. When they go to sleep, the body has to work extra hard to try and get rid of as much of that as possible. The lymphatic system kicks in to get rid of all the rubbish. The physiology has to move. It has to clean out whatever's in there when we sleep to try and get us into a deep state of rest. So what's happening, if you measured their deep sleep state versus dream states, when they sleep, you'll notice that their deep sleep probably is quite short. Their dream period is quite high. And that's because the dream state is where we release the stress. The dreams are just thoughts that are being produced because stress is being released from the body in a sleeping state, so the mind has to be busy trying to figure out what's going on. So it's just releasing a lot of stress in that dream state. So they're not getting the deep sleep. So they're busy trying to get rid of what's in there, not getting the deep rest that they need, and then waking up feeling exhausted because they've been busy in the night trying to get rid of the stress.
Well, and they're often busy in their minds before they fall asleep, right?
Exactly. So
they're worrying about the presentation they have to give tomorrow. They're stressed out about
absolutely
whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so they're going into their dream state with this, heightened, if they can even fall asleep, right? Then they once they get in sleep, it seems like it's a more restless.
Exactly. And fatigue is one of the biggest stresses that we are building on. Fatigue in this modern society we're living in, fatigue is one of the biggest stresses that is being put on the nervous system and the physiology. So that's why that's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I also work with addictions. And so then what we see is people are trying to compensate for their fatigue with, another cup of coffee, another double espresso. Maybe a lot of people are taking stimulants, other kinds, ADHD type of medications, that not necessarily for ADHD, right? And it can get into all the other stuff as well. And so then we have this chronic, disruption to our natural circadian rhythms and our rest and function cycles. I mean, it's a mess. And then the inflammation piece, since you're talking about the science, stress creates inflammation in the body. And it seems that nowadays we keep hearing about how inflammation seems to be like the root source of just about every illness, physical illness under the sun.
Yeah, well, Bruce Lipton, which who you probably, Dr. Bruce Lipton, his a lot of his studies is showing that, over 95% of most human illnesses are caused from a stressed nervous system, from stress. When you boil it down in simple terms, it's more complicated than that, obviously. So 100%, and unfortunately, we can't see what's going on until the symptoms start presenting visibly, so we can't see them. We don't know. And what we don't really, if I look back at the period of time where I started getting sick, I was in a very, I was very intense. It was, talk about, A-type. I was going and flying high and making the money and doing all the things, without and blaming the sickness on something else, when in actual fact I now can look back and see that what happens is the body will produce sickness in the areas that are your weakest areas, which you don't know. So that's what my weakest area was, and therefore the stress was just manifesting itself inside me in the weak areas, and everyone's weak areas are different, so we can't see that, unfortunately, and until it's too late, where we're catching it and then trying to fix it. So for me, it was like, okay, well, how do we catch it before we need to catch it? Catch it early, or catch it or prevent it from happening.
Yeah. So how do you help people recognize when they're like you were, or how I was early on, like when they're clueless about even, I'm not stressed, they might not even recognize that they're like amped up and going a million miles an hour. They just think that's normal. Like, how do you help them to recognize that they might be in a state of stress debt?
Generally, I have like an audit that I do on with them. So when I'm speaking to people, I go through quite a comprehensive audit. And when you start going through the audit, and I can see what's going on. They start to see, and when they're answering truthfully, because they're obviously talking to me for a reason, they can see. They start to see themselves because of the questions that I ask. They might answer with something being a 7 out of 10, and I'll ask another question, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I never thought about it like that. Okay, well then it's a 10. Does that make sense? So I work through an audit process with them where it's a real deep dive. It's a real deep dive into what's happening, lots of questions. It's very structured with a lot of other questions in between that help us get there. And then at the end, we come up with a score. So I've created a specific audit that gives them a score, and the score puts them into one of 4 different categories based on the outcome of the conversation. And then based on those categories, there are different mechanisms and tools that we can deploy to help them start to reduce the score. And that's how I start the process working with them. So that's generally how.
And I do want to ask you about those tools more specifically, but I'm still curious about root cause of things, right? And when I think about this topic, I think there obviously are multiple root causes for why we have so much stress in the workplace and why people are really struggling with their health, physical health, mental health, and all the things. Um, I see two possible things, and I'm curious what you think. I see one root cause is what the person themselves is bringing to the workplace from their own history, their family of origin, maybe they had trauma in their past. And so, all of that they're bringing to the table. But then also, what is the role that especially like a corporate culture, is bringing to the workplace itself? I feel like there's both those things happening.
So, yeah, well, there definitely is both of those things happening. If we just go back to like a very simple way to look at it, stress is a suppressed emotion, basically, like at its very simple causes. And it can be anything. It can be, you got bitten by a dog when you were 5 years old. And so now every time you see a dog, you get frightened because it leaves an impression in the physiology. So you react again. I come back to the finishing the stress cycles. You get a perceived threat or a real threat. The body releases chemistry. You're meant to do something, then it calms down and goes back into homeostasis, and all the stress chemistry is released. And we're not doing that. So what people are bringing that with them to work. They're bringing suppressed emotions from experiences, traumas, issues, stuff that has happened to them in their day, week life. In Sanskrit, they call them samskaras, which is where we get our word scar from. So it's an impression left from an experience that wasn't finished, as something that wasn't completed at the time that it happened. And they're bringing all of that in. And then so they're coming in with a lens. Okay, so they're coming in with their lens already. And then what is happening is the workplace have their own lens and their own expectations, and they're putting their expectations on the employee or the people that are, whoever's there, of their expectations. And the employees are reading the expectations from their lens. So if they're asked of something, or if something happens that is reflective of something that happened from a samskara that they're still carrying, they're going to react from the old place, not from the situation that's actually taking place, that actually has nothing to do with anything. It's just something very simple. So what the stress is doing from stored stress, so this is the stress debt that we're talking about. It's stored from, if you think about your body like a sponge, from the time that you're born, the sponge is wiped over and it stores everything. So, all the stresses have been stored through us our whole life, and they're sitting in our body because it keeps score. And we react from that place. Coming from a place of stored stress or stress debt, the brain's ability to recognize what's actually happening in front of them, the cognition is turned off. Our self-awareness is turned off. Our ability to see is turned off. So they're looking at situations and they're seeing it through the lens of old stress, old scars, old traumas, and therefore reacting. When we start to shift and that's happening both ways, right? Because corporations are run by humans. So you can have a CEO that's got their own stress debt that they've built up, and they're seeing a situation that's happening from, an employee point of view, a results point of view, or whatever, and they're coming from their own stress debt position. So we've got these two positions where people are not able to see what's actually in front of them, because there's no space between their reaction and situation. There's no gap. And that's where this sort of conflict is coming in, and where, therefore, we add more stress, because firstly, we're not finishing stress cycles. So think about it like this. Let's say, you're at work, something happens that causes you to feel like a threat. You get an email from your boss, and it's got something to do with performance. Like you're running a sales team, you've got sales results, etc., whatever it is, and you get an email from your boss. You're already at stress debt, so we're already at capacity. The email comes in, the physiology thinks it's a threat, so the physiology releases all the chemicals. What do? You sit on your bum, excuse my language, and you keep working. There's no movement that's happening. You just absorb it and you swallow the emotion that is attached to how they're feeling, rather than getting up, going outside, doing 50 star jumps as fast as you can, moving the chemicals through the physiology, releasing some serotonin and some dopamine, which obviously they can't work at the same time, calming the nervous system down, going back to the desk, reading the email again, and then seeing what the email is really saying is not how you've reacted. Now, just by doing something as simple as that is finishing a stress cycle in the moment, not swallowing it, because that's what we're doing. And we're also taught to swallow. You're taught to swallow. Our society is taught to swallow. Why do the South Americans have the lowest rate of stress because they're taught to scream and yell and cry and let it out.
Emotive. They're
Yeah.
very emotive. Yes.
Yeah. Same with I'm half Italian. Same with the Italians. Their arguments don't last. You have an argument in an Italian family, and it's 2 minutes, it's over, and everyone's kissing, crying, and it's all happy. We're not, as a society, we're generally not taught that. So that's what's happening in the workplace, and that's why these conflicts are happening.
Oh, it's such a good point. And then one more thing that comes to mind, I think that's making it even more complicated, is that the boundaries between your work life and personal life have really changed over time. Especially with the pandemic, when more people started working from home, we still have a lot of people working remote or hybrid. The boundaries around, with all of the devices, you're getting pinged by your boss in an email or on the Slack thread at, 10 o'clock at night. It used to be when I was a kid growing up, like people went to work 9 to 5. And when they came home at 5, that was it. You were not getting calls, emails, anything like that. You got to have off time. You got to have rest. You got to go out and be physical, whatever people were doing, and now it just seems like we don't have such a clear boundary there.
No, we don't. And, there's it's such a double-edged sword, isn't it? The whole remote working, because in one breath, it gives people, more time at home. They don't have to travel, they can put the washing on and go and do some work, those sorts of things. But what's happening is the pendulum swung too far in one direction, where it felt like, okay, well, we're letting you work from home, so the expectations are higher, that you're going to be more available, those sorts of things. So that's where the issue is. And unfortunately, we're not, there's an element of fear, particularly in the day and age that we're in at the moment, where there's job insecurity with all the AI and everything that's going on. People are too scared to actually not respond at 9 o'clock at night, to not get back to their boss. There's a fear. So there again, they're sitting at home, they get the ping, the nervous system reacts from a place of fear. Oh, what does this mean? I'm getting a message at 10 o'clock, and they feel like they have to do something about it. And this is also then just playing into, the sleep deprivation and why people are not sleeping. They're sleeping and they're not sleeping, all of those sorts of things. So, unfortunately, the benefit of working from home has started to become not a benefit. And funnily enough, a lot of people I know who have the hybrid are really enjoying when they go to the office, because they come home and they don't, they do switch off, even though we're connected all the time. So, we have to get better. Corporations and senior leaders have to get better at putting boundaries in, and being the lead. The leaders, the fish smells from the head down, right? So we've got to have the heads smelling like roses, so that the rest of the team that are coming on the journey also feel that. And that's where we've got a bit of shift that needs to happen. It is happening. Leaders are starting to change, and they are starting to want to know how to keep their employees well neurologically, so that is starting to change, but there's a long way to go. Yeah.
So let's get into that. How do we help people who are struggling with stress debt, whose nervous systems don't ever get to complete that cycle? They're just stuck in fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work with them? What are some of these techniques you're using with them to help them learn how to downregulate, how to slow down, how to be more calm, all the things?
So there's two ways, right? There's tactics, and then there's the main strategy, which is the keystone. So tactically, like for now, which is just, I'll focus on for a minute now, is how do we get people to finish a stress cycle, right? Quickly. It doesn't take long, 60 seconds, 1 to 2 minutes, You don't need a lot of time for your body to release enough serotonin, dopamine, and all the other feel-good chemistry to counteract the stress chemistry. You don't. And generally, the fastest way for people to do it is to do something physical in a really short space of time, something aggressive physically. So, for example, I mentioned star jumps. 60 seconds, right on the spot as fast as you can. Don't stop for 60 seconds. Do air squats for 1 minute as fast as you can. They're big muscles we're using, so we're releasing a lot. The body is needing to do a lot to get those muscles working, and then by doing that, we elevate the heart rate slightly. We get a little bit of sweat, and the body then starts to release serotonin, which is what makes you feel good. And the minute we start to release the serotonin, the chemistry that is causing the stress chemistry, can't be there at the same time. They can't both coexist. So one has to fall away. And so we do that for 1 minute, and then we stop and we just let our heart rate return to normal. The body goes, oh, look, the heart rate's returning to normal now. Everything must be okay. I'm safe. And then we calm down. So adding these micro sort of tactics in along the way during the day is one of the greatest gifts that each person can give to themselves. So think, like I said, air squats as fast as you can, time it, 60 seconds, go. Star jumps, the same thing, running on the spot. My favorite activity that I use in corporates all the time and is the ball bouncing technique. So, the sort of round, really high bounce balls. So one of the best games that you can play in an organization, at home, anywhere, on your own, doesn't matter, is the ball bounce. And basically, and this is all in the book, but basically, you put the timer on with your non-dominant hand, you bounce the ball as fast as you can, and you count in a minute. And then you stop for 30 seconds, and then you repeat exactly the same exercise for another minute. But the intention is you've got to beat the score from the first time. So just by doing this alone, there's a few mechanisms that kick in. Firstly, non-dominant hand means the brain has to switch, has to use, it's thinking. So the stress chemistries can't be there because the brain's too busy trying to figure out how to bounce the ball with the non-dominant hand. So it sets off different neural pathways. That's the first thing. So the second thing is it's physical. So we're releasing a bit of serotonin. We're getting the heart rate up. We're releasing a little bit of perspiration. And the third is we're trying to beat our score from the first round, which releases dopamine, which is the motivation molecule, the more molecule. So they want more, and it gets them excited. So that's like one of the best things. Every office should have a ball in front of every employee's desk. You should have them at home. And that's like a really key. It's the best game ever. And it was the game I used when my son was going through his high school certificate to get into medicine and all of those sorts of things. And I carry them everywhere. And so that's another really good tool. But when you can't be that, I guess, aggressive or move, right? So what else can you do? Okay, well, I can't do that right now because it's not an appropriate time, place, or whatever. Then humming. Humming is like a perfect tool. What humming does, mouth closed humming, is it activates the vagus nerve, which is the central highway of the nervous system. And the vibration activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the system that calms down. So the vibration causes the body to release the serotonin. The oxytocin is released with humming, which is the love, feel good, all of that chemistry. And just by humming, we can calm the nervous system down really, really quickly. And the simplest humming technique is literally breathing in through the nose, keeping the mouth shut, and humming until the breath runs out, and just repeating that 7 times. So you're talking about 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And that's another technique that is amazing to use.
Could we even just try that right now? I'm feeling like that's let's give people a sampling for how simple this actually could be. Could you guide us through a little exercise?
No problem. So all we do, it's good. You don't have to close the eyes. Closing the eyes is good because it takes the stimulation away. So we close the eyes. We take a deep breath in through the nose, and then we hum the breath out. Mouth, lips closed. When the breath runs out, we breathe in through the nose straight away again, and we hum it out again. I'll just keep guiding you through this for the next few. As soon as the breath is out, in through the nose, and hum. That's 3. We have 4 more to go. In through the nose. Make it a bit louder if you can feel the vibration in the throat. You want a bit more stress released. That's it. 3 more to go. In through the nose. And last deep breath in. Just keep the eyes closed and return to normal breathing just for a few seconds. Return to your normal breath. Just keep the eyes closed for a bit longer. And slowly open the eyes.
Wow. I really could feel a shift with that. What was interesting is the longer we went with more rounds, the deeper, the longer I could like hold my breath.
Exactly.
When we're stressed, we tend to shallow and rapid breathe.
Exactly.
So I noticed my breath getting deeper. I was like, oh, now I'm humming for a really long time here as we get to number 7.
Yeah, because the body doesn't need that much oxygen when it's in a calm, when it's in a calm, regulated state. The body doesn't need the breath, so that's why you can go longer when you do more. So the more we calm the nervous system down, the more the body doesn't need that volume of oxygen to keep it going because it's calm.
And the other thing too is I found myself making kind of an om sound, which, you know, I've had some exposure to some of the Eastern philosophies and practices. And is that really why om and this sort of chanting, you know, that people often will engage in with different spiritual practices, is that part of why we're doing that, is to like bring that sense of calm?
Yeah, so it's a frequency. So the Om is the sound of creation, basically, from the Vedic worldview, which is the other practice that I have in the study that I've done, the Vedic sciences, so the old Eastern tradition. And the vibration is a sound frequency, and whether you do it like out loud, it's good for these quick ones, it's good to make the sound, but that constant repetition when people are doing it not out loud, even in their mind, it still causes the vagus nerve to vibrate. And it's the frequency, it's a sound frequency that has no intended meaning, so the mind doesn't attach itself to what it means. So therefore the mind doesn't sort of get too involved, and the physiology likes how it feels, and the mind goes, oh wow, that feels really good. And that's why, you know, people drop into those calmer states by using those particular practices, because of the sound frequency vibration that vibrates the whole nervous system and in turn the whole body.
Fascinating. And the idea that people could, I mean, this is how powerful the mind is too, right? Like that people could just imagine doing the humming or the om sound or whatever, because maybe they're in a meeting and they can't hum out loud.
Yeah.
Maybe even that would be helpful, just to imagine doing that.
Yeah, so the mind's eye. So the other technique, which is the main keystone foundational strategy, is Vedic meditation, or it's also known as transcendental meditation. So TM, I call it effortless meditation because it's effortless. It's the only meditation practice out there that we say we welcome thoughts and we tell you to do nothing. We're not asking the mind to do anything. And it's based on a mantra which is specific to you, that you repeat in your mind's eye. So it's the same thing. So that foundational technique is the technique that I introduce with people that I'm working with as a starting point for exactly that reason. It's a quiet to self. And just by saying it in the mind's eye, the nervous system responds the same way as if you were to say it out loud, because it's a sound frequency that the nervous system likes and the mind likes. Our minds are taught to seek feel good from outside of ourselves. So when we're not feeling good, we're having a trough, or feeling down, we're taught to go and look over there for something that's going to make us feel better. We go and buy the new car, the new book, we eat something, we drink something, we take the drugs, we do all the things to help us feel fulfilled and better. What the practice does is it takes the mind inward, away from external fulfillment, because it finds the sound vibration charming. So it would rather follow that than go outside of itself. And the more we follow that, if you notice that in just 7 hums, how much calmer you feel. At the end of doing 20 minutes of this, we're dropping the body into such a deep state of rest that the mind is filled with bliss chemistry, all the good chemistry that we want, and it calms down so that when we come out into the waking state, the mind is not seeking fulfillment anywhere because it's already full, because it's coming from a calm state. And so that's what the main sort of technique that I work with people in these high performance roles that I introduce in to their life, along with all the other tactics, right? The tactics are great along the way during the day to deploy in those quick instances where you feel yourself getting fired up. But the main strategy is we actually need to upgrade the nervous system so that it's spending more time coming from a place of stay and play chemistry and less time coming from a place of fight and flight chemistry. So at the moment, most people, if you had 100%, most people are coming from, 80-20 fight and flight and 20% stay and play. Whereas what we want to do is we need to change the physiology. We need to change the way it works. It's like a full software upgrade. And we need to switch it so that over time, the stay and play chemistry becomes the majority, and the fight and flight becomes the chemistry that's there for exactly what it's supposed to be there for, not for anything else. And so that's kind of how we work together. So that humming is a very small practice that comes from the bigger practice, but works beautifully in any situation.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to stress also that yes, there's a temporary, obviously, effect. You get calmer in the moment. That's what I call kind of like the emotional first aid version of some of these tools. But then with the repetitive use of these techniques, and we know this from meditation. I mean, it's been studied. They've looked at people's brains, under MRIs, and they can see that with the repetitive practice, that the physiology of the brain changes. Different parts light up under the MRI. The amygdala is quieter. There's more coherence. Different parts of the brain are communicating more clearly, and it doesn't take very long. Some studies have found that even in 30 days of a daily practice, like using one of these meditative practices like the TM, that you see significant lasting results, not just temporary, but like really rewiring the brain, which is so exciting, that we can do that.
Yeah, it's compounding. So, I think the difference with the practice, and that's why I call it effortless meditation technique. It's a technique, it's a real scientifically backed technique. For me to be talking to C-suite and high leaders, going in with the more woo-woo side of it, is I wanted the science so that you can go in with the science, but it's a technique and it's compounding. It's like color fasting a cloth. In India, they take a cloth and they want to put a color into it. So they dunk it into the dye. They take the cloth out, they hang it in the sun and they let the sun fade it. And then they dunk it back in when it's faded and they hang it out and they let it fade again. And then over time, the color actually sets and the sun can no longer fade it. That's literally what we're doing to the nervous system by us dunking in and out of the bliss chemistry. Over time, it's compounding and it color fast. So the bliss chemistry becomes the dominant chemistry from which we operate from. And that's where the repetition and why the practice is just so incredible. It literally changes you from the inside out. And then when you change from the macro changes, because how you operate in the world changes. The vibration that you're coming from changes. The samskaras and the stored stresses are gone. They get removed from the physiology. They get healed. We heal from the inside out. The body knows what it needs to do to heal. We just need to put it into a state to allow it to do so. And that's where this practice is so powerful. It's the equivalent of 2 to 3 hours deep sleep, dropping into 20 minutes of this practice, and that's the science behind it. So the more we can drop into that deep state of physiological rest, the more the body can heal whatever is in there that's impeding its ability from operating optimally.
Yeah, I love it. And so when you talk about making these changes on the micro level, internally, what changes have you seen on the more macro level in these organizations?
So you see leaders coming from a place of calm. Calm wins every time. The calmest person in the room wins every time. So what you start seeing is less talking, more calm. The person who talks the most, never wins. The calmest person usually sits there and they're able to see the space for what's happening. They can see what is going on, and they know what the resolution is. People become more knowing, less thinking. Their intuition works better. So environments become more calm. They get more productive, like their productivity skyrockets. And this is where, the ultimate real, mythbuster is that we're taught to push harder and do more, when in actual fact, if we're coming from a calm place, we can achieve so much more in less time. So you're getting more productivity, you're getting more creative. Problem solving is completely different, because you see solutions, because your brain is coherent, it's working properly, there's nothing impeding its ability to see what's going on. So you start to see calm coming through organizations, better results, calmer people, less absenteeism, people loving going to work because everything is thriving. It becomes a more thriving environment. But calm is the ultimate thing that you notice. You just see less aggression, more calm, more collaboration, more creativity, more fun. They stay and play. That's what they're there doing, staying and playing. They're not grinding as much, and people, you can achieve so much more in such less time. The old saying is, do less, achieve more. Do nothing, achieve everything. And I know it sounds, very like esoteric, but it's not. It actually is what actually happens.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. Nic, if people want to find out more about you, your books, your work, where do they go?
They can go to my website where my book is and find me there, infinitecapacitybook.com, or they can go to Instagram and find me at Nic Monteforte, or on my website, nicmonteforte.com. Any of those places they can find me. And I'd love to hear from anyone who needs any support or has any questions. I'm open. I'm always there to, shine the light wherever I can and help people understand things better. So it's just been such a gift to be here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for shining your light in the world. If you hadn't gone through all the struggles you had, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that and for the work that you're doing. Thank you, audience, for tuning in today. If you have found this information useful, please do pass it along, share, like, subscribe, review, rate, do all the things that help this information get out there. And we'll see you next time on Kaleidoscope of Possibilities.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.